Playwright in the UK, we set the time differently. So it's happy hour now. So please be drinking or have your beverage of choice and snack of choice. I'm Michael Hollinger. I'm the artistic director of Villanova Theater. Welcome. I'm going to introduce our other guests very briefly. Their bios are on our webpage related to the SCAR test, of course, but just to get everybody on the page here. Those include, I'm going to start with Kate. This is our dramaturg graduate student, Kate Fischer, who was production dramaturg on this project. Our guest director, Claire Moyer, who is a freelance director as well as associate director and literary manager with Philadelphia's Inishnua Theater. And all the way from the UK, Hannah Khalil, our playwright in residence, thanks to Villanova's Heinbold Chair in Irish Studies, a really distinguished and wonderful program that's been going now for more than 20 years, where distinguished authors of Irish heritage come to campus and work with students and present their work. And it's been a great treat for us over the 20 years, and especially this year to have Hannah with us. So welcome, folks. I'm going to begin guests today, just so you know, chat is off, but the Q&A is on, meaning that at any point, please, we would welcome your questions. You could just add them to the mix. I will solicit questions more explicitly later on, but right now you have blanket permission to pose a question at any point. Also, folks who are watching, you can upvote a question. If you think that one question that is particularly of interest to you, you can vote to move that up, and that prioritizes it when we open up for Q&A. I'm going to start with a couple cues just to warm things up and get things going. And I recognize, panelists, that these may include questions that you've answered many times. I'm speaking particularly to you, Hannah, because I've already heard you talk about the play a little bit, but I suspect that our audiences, our visitors today, are going to be really curious, like, how did this play come about? How did you stumble on this subject? Why did you grab it and run with it? So if you could give a little bit of a recap of that, that'd be great.
Of course. Thank you so much for your lovely introduction. So the SCAR test is a bit different than other plays that I've written. Normally I have come across a subject matter or been exploring something and used a play as a way of kind of figuring something out. Normally that's sort of what I do. But with this, I had a small play on in a pub theatre in London, and afterwards I was approached by a young woman called Nadia Nadif, who is a producer and actor, and she told me that she'd enjoyed the play and asked me if I would be interested in writing something for her company about women in detention in the UK. And I laughed because I didn't realise women were detained in the UK. I didn't realise any woman was detained in the UK at all. And I was so shocked and embarrassed that I didn't know this fact that I went away and did a bit of research and was horrified by what I found out, and so said, let's have a discussion about this, let's talk about it. I'm not sure I'm the right person to write it, but let's have a conversation about it. And I was very privileged to go and meet the founder of the Yarlswood Befrienders. Yarlswood is the female detention centre that the play is based on, and it's in just outside of Bedford, which is a sort of satellite town from London, maybe about an hour outside of London. And when I met Heather, who had set up the Yarlswood Befrienders and had spent the day talking to her pretty much, I came away feeling quite sure that this was something that people needed to be thinking about and knowing about, and that it wasn't part of the conversation, and that if in some part me writing a play about it would help raise awareness, then I should totally do that.
Great, and I imagine that we are going to touch on this a little bit as we move through the afternoon, but that's a great kickoff. Thanks, Hannah. So I'm going to move to Claire next, and so folks out there in webinar land, we brought Claire on to direct this play back before we really thought that we were going to be doing it under pandemic circumstances. She had worked with our graduate program with many of our dramaturgs over the recent years on productions, readings at Inishnua Theater and productions as well. And so had an affinity with our program. We also knew that she was a specialist in, because of Inishnua Theater, a specialist in plays of the of the United Kingdom, also of Ireland. So we thought, hey, this might be a really great match, and it turned out to be. But we intended to do it as a physical production, and as time evolved, Claire and her body of designers really didn't know exactly how this was going to fall out, though we proceeded with the notion that it would be a physical production and filmed and streamed in some form. Since not all of you who are watching this webinar might have seen it yet, I'll spoil the surprise, but it is in fact a filmed staged production, but not from the point of view of any audience. So you're not looking at a stage, looking at a set. You are rather immersed directly in the experience of the play, moving through the set with its characters, which is quite a unique experience and quite wonderful for this play. So, Claire, I wonder if you could just talk with us a little bit about your evolving relationship with how does this thing manifest itself, and because you worked so closely with our director of photography, Michael Long, maybe reflect some of the conversations you had as you honed this vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it had to change a lot because in our first conversations over a year ago, it wasn't just that it was going to be a theatrical performance with an audience in a standard form, but it was actually supposed to be in rep. So, first conversations I had with our set designer, Stephanie Hansen, were incredibly far removed from where we ended up, because we were also talking about how do we create a set that will work, that can also be deconstructed or shifted for this whole other production that was supposed to be going up. So once that shifted away to just being the play by itself, there was kind of this middle ground. It was like, okay, it's a play. And then we had to kind of pause as we were watching things progress with the pandemic, and then sort of reconvene with this idea of, we're going to create a process that's as close to a theatrical process as possible from a point of view of rehearsal, moving into a theater space, a technical rehearsal. But we obviously can't have an audience, because that's where you're going to start reaching capacity of people. But you can have actors, if you do it right, and if you do it carefully, you can have actors, you can have, a sort of bare bones crew. Everyone has to be 6 feet away from each other. Everyone has to be masked at all times. So that obviously put a real shift on everything, because on the most basic level, like the set had to be built big enough so you could always keep actors 6 feet apart. Conversations had to be had of this scene has 3 people in it, so we need more space for this scene, or can we have someone just outside the playing space, things like that. So even before we started talking about kind of the film part of it, Stephanie and I had to start from a really logistical point of view of like, how do we get people in this space safely, while also telling the story and telling the play as accurately as we possibly can. So the scale of things kind of shifted, and it also informed some of the decisions we made around having this kind of like mesh structure within the set's walls. That was, there's an artistic element and a thought process behind that. There's also a point of like, oh, it allows airflow. It allows for, so like every conversation had to be like, what is the artistic benefit and goal with this? And then what is the health and safety benefit and goal, which is, not that we're casual about health and safety in theater in a regular circumstance, but it just was a whole other level of challenge and complication, and, engaging kind of a different side of your brain with all of it. And then the second part of it was that I felt pretty strongly that if we were going to shift into filming it, that it wouldn't be a satisfying audience experience to just, have some actors on a proscenium stage and point a camera at them. That, in the end, theater is made for the communal experience of watching it and experiencing it. And so there has to be some thought put into making this more than just ticking a box of like, oh, we've created a piece of theater. And so having that challenge of kind of creating this little bit of a hybrid between a theatrical structure and a film structure that gives you more flexibility with, camera movement. And a lot of the credit needs to go to Michael Long on that side, our director of photography, because I sort of sat down with him and was like, this is what I would like. I would like it to feel, at first I was really ambitious. I was like, I want continuous shots. And I was like, maybe not. Purely again, health and safety came into it. Like if you do continuous shots, you have to do quick changes. You have to have everyone in the space all the time. Whereas if, the nice thing about the piece is that the scenes can be relatively self-contained. So we could work on those, keep people safe, only have 4 actors in the room, knowing that all of it would get stitched together in this way after the fact. So we talked a lot about how the biggest goal was that the camera always had a point of view. The camera was never just there to capture actors moving in the space. The camera was always following someone, discovering someone, sort of behaving as if a person were walking through this space, opening doors, seeing things happening, observing these sort of things. So, and I think that's, again, that sort of my theater brain making film make work makes sense because I'm used to the idea that there is someone in the room having an experience of seeing it, having a point of view, making assumptions and decisions in situ as it's happening. And so to allow the camera to kind of perform that role, I thought was really important and bridge that gap in connection that we're losing by doing theater virtually. So yeah, and then there was an extremely detailed process of, we would block the scenes and then we would spend time looking at, Michael would join us rehearsal and he would look at each camera angle and he would he had photos of everything and we would check on what are our priorities of scenes, what do we need here, and then all the transitions of stitching stuff together. So it was a really specific, very rigorous process of knowing what the end product was in our minds, even though the end product was never going to be performed in sequence by the actors in the theater.
Such an amazing process. To hear it again, even though I've been part of this process from the beginning, just to hear it again reminds me of how, harrowing, unpredictable, and ever evolving it was. It's worth noting here too, we always in theatrical productions work with a set designer, a lighting designer, a sound designer, a costume designer. We never work with a director of photography. So that's been a new role in all of our productions this year where we realize that that's going to be a really key player. And also we've discovered with all of our productions this year that the other positions have changed their functions somewhat. So costume designer is a costume designer is a costume designer. That's the most stable. But our scenic designer in this case was really developing a studio, figuring out how to create spaces within a studio rather than for audience viewing. Our lighting designer, Jerry Forsyth, was finally this season actually lighting theatrical spaces and using theatrical lighting effects, but the way light works on film is very different from the way the eye perceives it on stage, and so that was a constant adaptation. And in this case, our sound designer, Damien, was spending a lot of attention on miking, making sure that actors could be heard, editing sound for the final mix, in addition to what our sound designers usually do, which is create sound effects and music as well. So it's been really interesting working with people whose job descriptions have been constantly in flux. One job description that stayed the same is our production dramaturg, which Kate has served beautifully on this production. And Kate, the dramaturg's job changes slightly with every production we do because the world of the play is so different. I'm curious to know what you felt was most important to convey to our collaborators initially, director, cast, designers, etc. What was the upload that people needed to have in order to feel like they could enter this very particular world of the immigration detention in the UK?
Yeah, so the first thing we do as a whole production team and cast is we watch the V file, which I put together, a lovely kind of visual feast of the show we're trying to create. And when I was working on that, I was by then pretty bummed out by everything that I'd been learning. It was hard to be excited about sharing that information with the cast until I realized that this play isn't a sad story, it is a war cry. And it's so actually empowering if you dig into it. So I thought that was the most important thing to share with the team first, is that we are not fighting a losing battle here. This is a good thing, and we are deserving of being energized to keep pushing through this. And then beyond that, I thought it was really important to state the facts plainly, because Hannah didn't know that this was 60 miles away. I didn't know that we had Berks and York County Prison detaining immigrants here in our own state. And since I didn't know any of that, I figured no one else probably did either. So we all got to learn together, which is, I mean, it was such a beautiful conflagration of everything that this program stands for, honestly. But yeah, definitely finding the balance between here's the reality and here's our hope for it.
Great. And Kate, thank you for mentioning the Berks and York County detention centers, because I wanted to make sure to plug another terrific talkback that's been part of this process. It's already been uploaded, and this is with two of our guests here. So Claire and Kate are doing a special talkback with a Villanova law professor, Michelle Pistone, who runs the CARES program, and with Margaret O'Sullivan, who works with Nationality Services Center, both of which are deeply engaged in refugees and immigrants and promoting better systems. So check that one out. It's also on our landing page. You can find it there. Great. Coming back, and I also want to say, folks, the Q&A is open. So, we can keep having a conversation here without you, but we would love to be jazzed by your questions. So please bring them forth. Hannah, you've seen a couple productions of this play. And I know now that I know you as a playwright better, because Hannah is co-teaching a playwriting class with me. So I know all sorts of things I didn't when we started this process. Could you talk a little bit about you've talked about the source material of this, the inspiration through Yarlswood and that initial trigger for you. Could you talk about the journey that you wanted to take an audience on? And I'm not asking you to kind of spoil what that is, but knowing you as a playwright that, I think a lot of people might assume, wow, this sounds like awfully grim material. A bunch of detainees, that sounds like serious business. That sounds like, serious food. But the work is so incredibly varied in terms of the range of tones and experiences that it takes an audience member through. Could you talk a little bit maybe about your strategy as a playwright in terms of subverting expectation, guiding expectation, and leading an audience through a range of experiences?
Sure. Wow, big question. I think the first thing to say is I really appreciate what Kate said about it being a war cry. And the way that this play was made is slightly different from my other plays, in that once I had met Heather and then had spent some time visiting women in Yarlswood who were being detained, I wanted to try and make the play in a slightly different way. I had ideas for how scenes might work and what the content of those, like what's dramatic, what feels like it could be really theatrical on stage to see. And I wanted to immediately be with other people for this one. So I requested that we have a workshop with actors, and that was how a lot of the scenes were born. So I had a bunch of ideas of how I wanted things I wanted to try out, and we had about a dozen brilliant actors here in London for a day, and the amount that we managed to get through was incredible. But what was really powerful was at the end of the day, I asked them all to read some testimony from verbatim testimony from women who were being incarcerated about what had happened to them and why they had made their way to the UK. And this was extremely upsetting and traumatizing, as you can imagine, for all of us, because it's, really graphic and hard to hear. And then I went home and had a long think and decided that absolutely mustn't be in the play, because the play is not about the awful things that happen to cause people to seek asylum. It's about how they're treated when they arrive, and there's no sort of levels of like who deserves more depending on what's happened to them or where they've come from. So it was a really feminist, and also I also really object to the idea of descriptions of violence against women's bodies. We have enough of that in the world. So I made a conscious decision I didn't want to do that. I also very much, when I'm writing, want to take an audience on an unexpected journey, because I know, I go to the theatre all the time, that when we watch a play, we maybe have idea of what that play might be. So to undermine people's expectation and to try and give them a sense of what, you know, life would be if you're in a scenario where you're not in control of what's going to happen next. So without giving too much away, I did try to kind of put some red herrings in there, so you think you know where you're going and maybe you don't. And I hope that reads well, and so that feels like an interesting journey for the audience to go on as well. And the ending of the play as well, you know, I had some interesting conversations when we did the first production in London, because a lot of people who we were meeting to talk about it, who were potential directors or producers, were sort of concerned that the play felt unfinished and gave me lots of suggestions about how it might feel more finished. And I was like, no, it's not supposed to be finished. I don't want people to walk out going, and where shall we go for dinner? I want them to walk out feeling, you know, oh, you know, a bit uncomfortable and like they need to talk about it, because it's not finished, the baton is very firmly passed on to the audience to have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Thanks, Hannah. I love that notion of all the helpful suggestions. I'm going to misquote it, but I've heard saying that the three essential life forces are the drive for food, sex, and suggesting changes to other people's plays, fixing other people's plays. So we have an audience question. I'm delighted to pass that along. And the question is this: would the audience member, hey, Gay Strickler, would love to get a general idea of how the actors responded to playing opposing roles, staff as opposed to detainees, and that this crew knows was an extremely purposeful use of doubling. The play does not specify specific character doublings, but that was a big part of the casting process. So Claire, I wonder if you could take that on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about it from, you know, individual actors' experiences, but yeah, Michael touched on something, which is that when actors were cast in the show, they were just cast as the ensemble originally. The script is incredibly flexible around how many actors you need, around, you know, basically you can cast whoever you want in whatever role in whatever way. And I love scripts like that. I work on a lot of scripts like that, but that can also be really challenging because it involves a lot of Excel spreadsheets to figure out who's in what scene and who lives where. And, you know, trying to give people the opportunity to have something meaty within the roles to, you know, to work on, especially as this is an educational environment and you want people to be able to hone the crafts they are working on as students. So yeah, there was a purposeful delineation of roles to make sure that, apart from Stefan, who played the guard throughout, the sort of primary guard, that every actor played at some point both a detainee and someone who was on staff or outside of Jarlswood, so that no person was spending the entire rehearsal process playing a character who was experiencing the trauma of being detained. But that doesn't mean it wasn't hard in other ways. You know, we spent a lot of time looking at, you know, how you can work as an actor on challenging material, on characters who are either experiencing trauma, have experienced trauma, or in this case, in some situations are inflicting trauma, and walk away as a human being who's playing those characters whole and not damaged by them. You know, spending a lot of time in a world where people are struggling can start chipping away at you as a person. So we did do some work with Rachel Hanlon Rodriguez, who is a alum of the Villanova program and who does trauma-informed work within theater, and they were amazing working with the actors on developing some exercises to help differentiate sort of work within the rehearsal space, work within character, and, you know, leaving and going about your day, which was amazingly helpful. And I imagine, again, I'm not a student in this program, but you're also, as students, all the actors are also seeing each other all the time in classes and work study and things like that. And we also did some exercises within the process using Michael Chekhov technique, which also works a lot with the idea of characters as being archetypes. So it's not about sort of you as a person mining your own experiences. It's about recognizing the experiences of characters in a sort of broader sense and applying them to your action on stage. So we worked in certain ways to try to create an environment which hopefully was useful to the actors in navigating that. But I think I will say that I don't think there was a role within the play that was particularly easy for anyone, just because of that dichotomy of either being someone experiencing trauma or being someone who is either inflicting trauma or struggling within a system that they see is problematic, like the solicitor or the befrienders.
Thanks, Claire. And that reminds me that because of the doubling scheme, it required that all of those actors take on an accent of both someone from a country that was, that a detainee came from, as well as a UK accent, which is part of the audition process and part of the individual cast figuring out where did they want to be from based on their comfort level with finding accent, their own demographic, and the needs of the play. And Kate, I wanted to kind of toss to you the research that you did that informed this process, because obviously immigration and refugees is a constantly shifting population in any country. It is in the UK. It was of a certain countries were primary sources for detainees during the period that Hannah was doing her research. That evolved over time, is different now. And could you talk a little bit about what you found and the shifting nature of those populations?
Yeah, what's weird is that countries kind of change rank as to which one has the most people who are detained in the UK. Tends to be the same 10 countries. And it's interesting, even when you come over to the US, we have slightly different populations because we're connected to a different continent, for example. But you still saw a lot of the same countries, a lot of places in the Middle East, for example, a lot of places in Northern Africa, in Eastern Europe. And what was hard about that, on the one hand, it means that nothing's getting better other places, and it's not getting better for the people who are trying to leave those places. On the other, it meant that our actors had a lot of really cool countries to pull from and say, okay, based on this reason my character is detained, I think I could be from, let's say, Uganda. So I'm going to work on this kind of accent for my detainee character. And then, I guess I'll just learn how to have a Northern accent for my, no big deal. It was really cool to see how, with all of this data of, all of these major 10 odd countries, everyone chose something a little bit different that fit their character best. So it was really nice to have the research be a conversation as opposed to just here's the table, have fun. Like, no, we actually got to chat about it, which was really special.
Thanks. It's making me think, Hannah, about your process of identifying who these people are. The characters are so beautifully sculpted, yet we know little about them at times in terms of their countries of origin. We don't know names. Those who watch the film may not realize until you get to the credits that characters have names like Strong Lady, Menzies Lady. So at what point did you make that decision? I imagine you may have begun with working names for characters, but did you know all along that you were going to create them? I hate to say generic because they're not generic whatsoever, but they are very adaptable to many different national identities.
Actually, I never gave them, they never had names. And actually, often in my plays, characters don't have names. And I think it's to do with not wanting to lead the witness, as it were. I don't want a name always has so many connotations. I was talking about, a friend who is pregnant and is having issues choosing a name for her child because she doesn't want her baby to have a name of someone she knows, because that will bestow certain things on that child. And I guess it's a similar thing. Like I know that there are certain names that have particular connotations, so I tend to avoid naming because I don't want casting directors to narrow or directors to narrow their field of vision in terms of who that person is. And I'm always excited by the idea that, you know, one person might read it and have very strong ideas. And this is true for, you know, lots of my plays, my play Plan D as well, which, although it's set in 1948 in Palestine, actually could be a lot of other places as well. The idea being that it's about human experience, and it's about getting to the crystallized sort of heart of human beings, you know. And again, like, you know, the big question that our privilege is where we're born and the passport we have and the color of our skin. And so to sort of try and receive those things and try and to try and give a sense that this could be anybody. I'm tired lady sometimes. I mean, I'm not. I'm very privileged. I'm not tired lady sometimes, but you know. So I think that's what I'm trying to do. And more, you know, the more plays I write, the play I'm writing at the moment, as you know, Michael, because you've seen some of the scenes, you know, the characters are man one and man two and sister, and yeah, it's something I don't think I'll stop doing, because I like the potential universality and openness, and yeah, to say the phrase again, not leading the witness, sort of allowing people to interpret things.
Wonderful. And you got some snaps from our playwright faculty member James Imes, who loves everything you just said about that. Of course, you know, the openness of that casting becomes really real when they have to be embodied by actual actors. And I'm curious, Claire, if you could talk about that as an imperative. Obviously, you know, in the audition room, we're always looking for the best actors for a part. There are also some imperatives, because we're talking about trying to represent populations that are likely to be immigrant or detainee refugee populations within the play. Could you talk about those imperatives as we went into the casting process?
Sure. I mean, this is a unique casting process because you're working within the parameters of a university. So, you know, in professional productions, I can look at actors from the entire city of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia region, sometimes the entire East Coast. So, you know, you're looking at folks within this university, and obviously it was also open to undergraduate students. I mean, to be very frank, from the start, the conversation was, you know, we just need to look at the data on who is being held to know that the majority of roles in this play are for BIPOC artists. And there is no point in doing this play if you are not honoring the reality of what these detention centers look like in the US or the UK, wherever you know, we left it in the UK because of the line, "This is England," but you know, within these stories about detention that you're telling. And so that was pretty much obviously, like, you know, kind of a line in the sand about the production. There's no reason to do this, and it would not be, it wouldn't be right to do it otherwise. And so that definitely obviously informs the casting. But like I said, the general casting was as an ensemble. So I didn't cast anyone specifically to play a different part. Everyone was, you know, when the cast list was up, it was ensemble. And then I sort of spent some time going through and looking at the different stories. Basically, it's a very kind of like logic-based way of delineating characters. And it's the same thing I did with the actors in the rehearsal process, facts and questions, right? Go through what are all the facts you know about these characters, what are all the questions you have, staying very close to the script, not deviating and creating fantastical backstories or, you know, some sort of long lost, you know, sibling or something that like maybe informs it. You're like, where is this in the script? Like staying very, very close to the script. And from there, kind of looking at what different actors' strengths were, and then trying to make sure, like I said, that everyone had at least one good scene that they could spend some time on, at least one opportunity to really flex some muscles as an actor. And then kind of the balance of, I think this person is a good fit for this kind of role because of X, Y, and Z, but if they're in these 3 scenes, then I can't use them in this way. So it really does just become like a big puzzle at a certain point. And you do make, you make some compromises in there where you're like, no, I really need this actor to play this part because they're going to bring this to it. So maybe, we shift this person here a little bit. So yeah, it's a big puzzle. And I kind of gave myself the caveat of like, and I might get into rehearsal and realize all this is wrong. But actually it panned out pretty well. I think I added in like one person as a guard at one point. Yeah, it was finding that balance of again, like I said before, not giving anyone a wholly traumatic experience within being a detainee. But then also, once we were in rehearsal, I kind of created, I hope, a structure that allowed them to fill in the gaps, like Kate was saying. So it's like, you're playing Menzies lady or tired lady or whatever. So if you look at the facts, then what are the conclusions you can draw? If you know this person, I think curry was a really helpful one. Constipated lady talks about missing curry from home. So there was an entire conversation of like, okay, that's literally like one of 3 things we know about constipated lady. We know she likes curry. We know she has a daughter. We know she used to grow a vegetable garden. So how can we make that like, so then the actor with Kate's support and obviously my support can go and do this research. And I remember Vashante coming back and being like, well, curry's a big thing in the Caribbean, and Jamaica in particular has, and it was really like, great, so that there was this, it's a very different process than what you would often do with a script that is more kind of like aggressive in delineating these things, where an actor kind of inherits these attributes and has to adapt to them. It was a process where we could be like, okay, these are your 3 things, like you fill in the gaps. And I think it's a different kind of challenge for actors, and it's a really cool thing to be able to do, to be able to flex those muscles. But it did put a lot of onus on the actors to like, say, or to be like, I really want to explore an accent from this part of the world, or I really want to like, I want to find a difference. So one of my characters has this kind of accent and go very extreme different, or I'd like my characters to have similar accents to give me an easier time. Like all those were completely, valid options. And to be honest, I think some of the casting was actually the hardest for the characters we had the most information about, because you had to make it work. And some of the conversations in rehearsal were, I think, like placing those characters got a little bit more challenging because you had more information and you had to find a way to connect the actor to that person's experience and where they're from in a way that was like logical with the data we had that Kate had supplied and our knowledge of like immigration today and what laws. I think someone mentioned, I don't even remember a country once, and I was like, that would be great, but those people are part of certain European Union countries, so they would not be detained, like having that kind of information to inform it. So it was a really cool process and kind of worked backwards in a lot of ways, where it wasn't me being like, no, you're this character and this is what your character has experienced. But I think it's, again, like it's a really cool exercise for actors. And I think the other part of it being that because these characters are so sort of tight in our experience of them, I think the longest character study is maybe 5 scenes. A lot of characters we see for a scene, a line even. I think it's a really awesome skill to be building, right? Like I think we often think when you're cast in something, you get to do Hamlet and you get to spend hours creating this person on every level, and you get to play these really complicated scene trajectories. And in this case, it's like, no, you have to come in and in 3 lines, we need to know you're a guard and we need to understand what your relationship is to 7 other people, and then you have to leave. And I think that's a really specific skill for actors that is not always one we think about. And it's one that applies like in all sorts of shows. It's not just this, or films, but I think that was a cool opportunity for the artists involved to kind of give depth to parts in a very efficient amount of time, essentially on screen.
Thanks, Claire. And as you talked about all the different roles that our actors took on, I just want to praise our dialect coach, Erin Nicole Washington, who based in LA, but able to work with us through the miracle of Zoom and remote rehearsals. And really worked hard with the actors to try to, form and sculpt their characters based on dialect alone. We have a question here, and we'll probably wrap up shortly, but we'll take any additional questions that you folks have. This is from Matthew Redden, who is a dramaturg in 2 other projects this season at Villanova. Great question, and let's leave it up because it's long enough that we'll want to refer to it. What are some ways the need to film this production unlocked new or exciting or interesting creative possibilities that wouldn't have been possible or easy on stage? And I'd really toss that to any or all 3 of you, because I think you all interacted with these in different ways.
I'll dive in. Yeah, I think so. I think the 2 points that stand out the most to me that were like challenging within this process, it wasn't necessarily because of the filming that it became challenging. It was because of the fact that we needed to leave people 6 feet apart and masked. So it's funny, I think the filming was just a really like, we were able to get creative with it. And I really do. Yeah, we definitely were. But the points where I'm like, oh, this is harder, or this is more challenging, or we have to think about this came because of that. There's the scene in the cafeteria where the guards are intimidating Tired Lady. The stage directions are they whisper threatening things in her ear. And we're like, well, they can't be 6 feet from within 6 feet. So they clearly can't be whispering. And second of all, even if they were whispering, we couldn't see because they've got masks on. So I had to reach out to Hannah and be like, please help. Can you give us some lines of text that these guards could say? And she, of course, immediately was like, yes, here you go. And that really helped. But at the same time, the scene within the scene between Hungry Lady and Constipated Lady, where they're talking and Strong Lady is being removed and you don't see it, in a theatrical production, you would see those physical events, and again, it's one of those situations where there's not a ton of text because you would see the 2 people talking and you would see the 3 people interacting. But because we couldn't have actors actually physically remove someone, we tried some weird improvisation. We couldn't really get it to be like clear enough. And I totally give Michael Long credit for this. He was like, well, then let's not show it. And I was like, yes, you are correct. And so then it was a conversation about like, Damien, what can you do with Foley to fill this in? How much can we sort of see on the outskirts, right? People walking behind, you can see them leaving behind, we can see them entering, we can watch the 2 actors who are talking, see things over their shoulder. And hopefully we're still realizing the moment as it was presented to us in the play, which is this horrific thing is happening while these 2 people are having this very kind of almost like mundane conversation about normal life things and trying to kind of preserve their sense of normalcy and humanity while this like horrific act is happening feet away from them that they can do nothing about. So how do we shift that in a way that allows us to keep people safe and actually kind of utilizes the beauty of film, which is that we can decide what an audience member is looking at, as opposed to in theater where we get a sort of broader visual at all times. So those are the ones that like I think were the most challenging, but I thought we sort of found a way to solve them. And the canteen one, we also made sure to show shots from Tired Lady's point of view. So like Michael literally sat in her spot and like showed the guards coming at her from those points of view. So we could get a sense of like why this is more extreme than another moment. And we did that actually with the Strong Lady one too, because we wanted them to echo each other.
Great. So Hannah and Kate, any revelations in terms of seeing what the film allowed for or necessitated?
I have one, yes. So I was really curious what scene would be that one image that really caught in people's head, because I knew what it was when I first read the script. And then when we did the read through, I was like, oh, it's definitely going to be this moment. It's going to be this incredible soundscape moment. And somehow a moment of hands reaching towards each other meant something very, very different in our production of it, in our time that we're producing it, than it did on stage. So I'm really curious to see how people are going to respond to this production relative to other ones, because we all now have this really bizarre sense of loneliness that I think a lot of us didn't have before. I mean, I was remote for this entire process, and the department was fabulous and found ways for me to help from far away. And that wasn't new, exciting, or interesting. That was just standard for Villanova. But it was really cool to see how different moments really popped out when you were filming it. And also because you could be closer to people's faces. There was something so wonderful about just seeing everybody's eyes the whole time. You looked in all of these actors. They're so talented. I can't handle it. They were so incredible. They were so there. Every time you look into their eyes, you see a universe. And it's just, that was a really, really special experience for someone who doesn't have very good eyesight to see actors' eyes.
Yeah, and I think one thing Hannah had said was, that how these masks, wind up they disappear. How you forget that they're there. Until you actually saw some of the cast yesterday without their masks. It was a little startling. Hannah, you've seen obviously other productions of the play, and I'm just curious to know if there were a moment or moments where you kind of saw the scene that you had written anew because it had been done in this particular way.
I don't think I saw anything anew, but I think that the really smart decisions that Claire and Michael Long made in terms of the choices of camera, I have generally a sort of grappled this last year with theatre, digital theatre, because for me theatre is about liveness and being in an audience and the social responsibility of that and the uniting aspect of that. And so I haven't enjoyed a huge amount. There has been some that I've enjoyed, but I haven't enjoyed a huge amount of digital theatre. And so I was sort of anxious, but I think making that choice of the camera to have a perspective and how that then feeds the whole voyeuristic nature of the whole thing. It's very much a studio show. If you see it live, you need to be close to it and feel implicated, because you're also watching these women in the way that is exposing to them and that they don't want. So I think those decisions were so exciting and smart and sort of hand in glove for the themes of the play, that they worked really, really well. And I was also really delighted with the canteen scene, because I don't think I've quite seen it. It hasn't been done in a way that really feels like, I'm worried I'm giving things away. Sorry, audience, if you haven't watched it yet, but a little spoiler. But I'll try and not spoil too much. But what happens in the canteen, the way that then the thread of that leads to a victory, a continued victory for one of our characters, and the way that, because it's written in the script in a particular way, but it's sort of open to interpretation. And I really liked the way it was interpreted and used, and it felt very victorious. Because one thing that stuck with me when we did an early R&D sort of scratch performance in London before the London production was that someone approached me who had been a former detainee and just said to me, "We're not victims." And I freaked out, because I was like, oh my goodness, is that what you're reading? Is that what you're thinking I have written? Because absolutely you're not, and that's absolutely not what I want to do. And so I went away and had a long, hard think, and actually that canteen scene came as a result of that unwitting note. Because none of these women are victims. They're incredible survivors, and they're so strong and amazing, every single one I met. And so I really loved the way that this production took that canteen moment and the victory of it, and then the thread of that victory, and that the way that grew within our character, and we get to see her overcoming in the most dire of circumstances. I welled up a little bit. So I was very pleased about that. I thought that worked really, really well. So congratulations to everybody for the whole thing, but that bit I gave me a little, and the space it was afforded. That's the other thing, you know, I really like the airtime everything had. Nothing felt rushed. And so particularly that scene after the canteen scene where we spend a little time with one character. I love the airtime that we have, the space that's given, the weight. Yeah, it was a joyous thing to see.
Thank you, Hannah. And I don't think that's a spoiler at all. If anything, it's just a nice teaser for folks who haven't seen it yet. I think we're going to wrap there because that was a lovely little Valentine to end on, Hannah. I do want to thank our three guests, Kate and Claire and Hannah, for joining us for our speakers night. And also I want to make sure to pitch again the talk back that we mentioned earlier. That's specifically dealing with immigration, both in the UK and the US, that's already uploaded online. If you have friends who wanted to see this one will be uploaded too. And Hannah is with us through the rest of this semester and working on a new play. The pages are still damp as they're coming out. And this is called The Galtee, at least that's the working title now, dealing with Irish immigrants in the UK in the 20th century. I'm getting that right, Hannah? I mean, who knows? It may be changing, but we just had auditions this morning, which is really great to begin hearing these fresh pages. And they will be presented on Sunday, May 2nd at noon. We're having a little kind of brunch reading or sharing of pages in a Zoom format. So stay tuned. We'll have a Zoom link for that too. And on we go. Thanks so much, folks. And everybody stay safe. Hope to see you in a real theater soon. Bye-bye. Thanks, Chelsea. All right.